In 1856, in a small plot of land about 20 miles northeast of Asheville, a group of people decided they were going to start a new school. And they did. They named it the French Broad Baptist Academy. Is that right?
Yes.
Academy. And at almost at the same time, the church grew up that supported the people who were there. It was called Pleasant Hill Baptist Church. And the history of Mars Hill University has always been allied in a very close way with the local church, which first was Pleasant Hill, and then ultimately in 1859, Mars Hill University, or then college, became Mars Hill as a result of a change. The college went to the idea of using the place where the Apostle Paul had given a wonderful sermon, the Areopagus in Greece. And so Mars Hill College, ultimately then the church became Mars Hill Baptist Church. And in the early years, when there was no building, the local people met in the college facilities. And so the relationship between both groups has been, I guess, you might say, joined. They were always joined together. Today, we have with us an illustrious person, and I can say that, Tommy. In Georgia, James Earl Carter was the President of the United States, and he chose to be Jimmy Carter. The Reverend Dr. Thomas Clyde Justus prefers to be Tommy, and Tommy, we like that a lot. That's neat. Why did you decide you wanted to just be Tommy?
I guess I thought a whole lot about it, except that Thomas seemed too formal, and so I couldn't. And I never did stick with using the middle initials, so I just stuck with Tommy. In high school, a movie came out that had somebody in it named the actor's name was Buford T. Justus, so they used to call me that. So I think I was sort of a reaction, maybe I didn't want to be. They used to call me Buford because of that. And I said, well, I'll run away from that and stick with Tommy. So,
I'm sure you get people also to get the last name wrong, calling you Justus as opposed to Justus.
Justus.
I've often thought, though, your name is the perfect last name, the surname is the perfect last name. If they misdo it and say Justus, well, you're the perfect candidate for that because you spend much of your life in social justice issues. And if you say Justus, your real name, it's just us. You know, and there's no one it's not going to be just with you. It's going to always want to be with you, Justus. Anyway, it's been a great thing to have Tommy to be a part of this community as the minister of the church. He came here in September of 1995. And so coming up September of this year, it's 23 years. And Tommy, I don't know whether you know this, but indeed you are the longest serving minister of the Mars Hill Church. Did you know that?
I did not know that, but
Go 23 years is next followed by Richard Price at 18. Jesse R. Owen was the only theater builder.
Right.
Was at 17. Leroy Sams was 12, and Mr. Lynch was 8. So
wow,
you have achieved an incredible.
I've gone longer.
Come a long way. Come a long way.
Long-suffering people. That's what.
And if I remember correctly, you had only been 31 a month when you became the minister. Is that correct? Or were you still?
Yeah, that's right. I was young.
Yeah, very young. Look at that, and I think here you are, 23 years, and you're still a young man, and you have all this incredible career yet ahead of you, wherever it's going to take you. I remember in 1995 when I knew that you were going to come and preach your test trial sermon. I was so upset. I was not here that summer, and so I said to Jerry, I wrote him, I was in New Haven, and I said, Jerry, it seemed like you're going to do a recording. I said, I got to hear this sermon, and they did. There is a recording somewhere, maybe you've seen it already.
Yes.
So he did, he gave me a recording afterwards, and I got to hear you anyway. And it was neat because the church had gone through, we had not expected your predecessor to leave as quickly as he did.
Right.
He hadn't been here very long. And so just to a new person was going to be something tricky. But you came and you did it. You've been 23 years. I think it's amazing.
Long time.
When when the community here in Mars Hill finally built a building, they built it in the church building, they built it in 1887, and it sat on the same site where Owen is today. The one picture I've been able to find of it, it was a sort of beautiful little building.
Yeah, just a hoverboard almost.
Yes, and apparently it was not built well. And so within 20 years, it was declared, inefficient and was gone. So it was not until 1918, in fact, 100 years ago this year, that the current building, which is Owen Theatre now, was built, and Jesse R. Owen was then pastor. Of course, that's how Owen Theatre got its name, based on Pastor Owen.
Right.
So that building, was a very solid building, it still is, and served for quite a while. But then very early on, it was realized that there was not going to be enough room in there even. And so the church was still using college facilities for all kinds of different things, meetings and services and so on. In 1954, we have the current building. And the college very quickly realized that to have that wonderful old building on campus, they bought the old church from the current, from the church, bought this
Swapped the
building.
property for us, so we could have like.
What was swap for it,
The property that the church was
Oh, that's what I'm talking
part
about,
of the dorm property, and
That's right, I forgot that.
and they took that.
Took that instead. Anyway, the current building then has been there since 1954, and as of Father's Day this year, has undergone a major renovation. Talk a little bit about the renovation, Tom.
Well, when it was built in '54, 700 students were basically required to come.
Yes.
And so they took a building, if you go to First Baptist Brevard, they have the same building done the same year, same architect. And if you look at that building, it was built for about 700 people, 650 is the capacity. They needed to hold 700 students plus 200 people locally.
Right.
So they crammed them in. And so they made tighter pews, no aisle space. And so for those next years, until this year, we lived with that. There was really except for doing the windows outside and carpeting a couple of times, painting, there was no major renovations done to the building from '54 until 18. So when we did it, it was a major move forward to change, and didn't really change. If you walk in it today, you still get the same feeling, I think, that you would have then. People loved that. It was a beautiful setting and nice. But then to bring it back size-wise by spreading out, making aisle space, making movement in there, we've all gotten wider as well. And so to make it more acceptable, now it seats 500, which is still a lot, but without having the 700 students required to come, it's definitely changed the fixture of it. It also, we added some creative things. We're the first in the area, as far as I know, to have fandeliers.
I know, I saw those, that's fabulous. You're getting light and air in the same
thing, and it looks like it's an attractive piece as well. So we've had that. We fixed the front that I know you have been interested in for years, and appropriately so. We fixed the front. It had recessed stairs that were awfully dangerous.
They were.
For the stage access, and so now we spread that out and made the steps better and easier to come along, and we built the stairwell that goes along either side, so you can move to the choir loft or to the front stage without feeling like you're endangered to fall off. And that, as you and I both have seen a number of times, been dangerous. So
I was always worried about that. As I've watched, when I was watching my mother age, and she began to use canes and all those things, and I would watch her, she would grab it, and I thought, once I saw Dr. Underwood come down those stairs, and I thought, oh my goodness, I hope she doesn't trip over something.
And Paisley sat down.
And then Paisley sat down. I know I saw him that Sunday just sit. I was grateful he didn't tumble forward and get hurt. So it really is quite lovely in there. You're right. Until I sat in the pew, I didn't realize how much space we now have, between us, which is really nice. The building is lovely, and of course, one of the things that happened in the early '60s, and Pauline Cheek's little history of the church is really, she comments on this too.
She's a great job.
It's a wonderful job. She comments on this. when students became more mobile and they had cars, they went home on weekends or they went everywhere, then they weren't here
Right.
on weekends. I remember when I first came here, Dick Price was then minister, and this was a constant issue of where are the students and how do we get them here? And you would have had that same issue.
Oh, the interesting piece for me when I came was that, you know, I had been a youth minister all my career to that point. So to become a pastor, part of their interest, I think, in becoming was that I had that experience with young people. So that was a blessing and a curse when you get here and realize that two things I came across pretty quickly, that large majority, at that time 80+% of the students, came from the 5 surrounding counties.
Yes.
So with cars and mobility, if they went to church on Sunday,
They went to church.
they went home because they could be home in 20 to 45 minutes. One young lady even told me when I asked her, it was an icy day and she came to church. And I said, do you go to church most Sundays? And she said, oh yeah, I just go home because Dad will give me, he'll take me to lunch and give me $20. So she said, I go home for it. I said, why not?
Good incentive.
So, but I think that's what happened. The students tended, if they were attending, which wasn't necessarily a large number, there were two things that were happening. They were either going home, or there were a few churches that were aiming at students in a big way and were drawing UNCA students and possibly some other Brevard or other college students in Asheville. And so that was a draw for students. So they were going there. So we weren't attracting them. The other thing that happened was we had a long memory. Jerry had been here, the associate pastor time, 20+ years, and he said students weren't here in his time.
They weren't.
And so, but people still talked about, there were still people that could remember before that when the 700 were there in worship. And so to change that mindset was hard, and I don't think you do anything but live through that for some part. Nobody talks about it anymore.
No.
But they did for my first at least 10 years.
I'm not surprised.
I remember, and then a lot, you know, anytime students, we talked about how we would try to attract students or deal with students or do things on campus for students. It was always, well, when we had 700 coming, you know, and so you couldn't go forward much because you were still trying to live through that old piece.
I remember the one thing that Tim Clifton was talking, we did an interview with him recently, he was talking about that Sunday where he brings his athletes, you know.
Yes, to service.
It's always nice to see that place, see the church filled up with all these incredible young people.
Oh yes, that's a great
feeling. It would be nice if
feeling.
they would stay and come all the time.
But the interesting piece on that is that's who we do have, though, that come, the group that comes on Sundays, and we'll have anywhere from 8 or 10 some Sundays to 25 during school year, once in a great while, but it's always the athletes, almost always. They're the number that come because they are here on the weekends.
Right. Yeah.
And often don't have cars or mobile transportation, and you know, they may even have a game on Saturday or Saturday evening, and so they're here either baseball or basketball or soccer. They're the ones that are here on the weekends. So we've had more success with students, athletes, and their coaches or who are in the church.
That's right. And I know that Tim has been a strong leader in that regard, to be sure that they come. While we're talking about young people, let's talk a little about you when you were a young person. I know you grew up around in the Hendersonville area and were born in 1964.
Very good.
Tell me about growing up around Hendersonville. We associate the folks who had what we are called the implants, those of us who came after those who were always, you know, we were always called implants because we didn't grow up here. Associate Hendersonville, the town, of course, with a place where people go for summer resort kind of thing, and apples, music, because of Brevard, being close by. Tell me about your life growing up but you actually grew up in East Flatwater, didn't you?
No, grew up in Dana.
In Dana, okay.
Dana, the big city. It was a small community. Dad used to say, we lived so far out in the country, we would go back toward town to go hunting. And so we were out in the country. It's no longer that way much in Henderson County at all, but we weren't in the city. When you tell people you're from Hendersonville, they had a different picture than the rural area that I grew up in. But my family was land granting property there, so it goes
way
back multiple generations. So yeah, we hadn't gone far from that little plot that we'd gotten 100 years before that. So that was my growing up in an area that I couldn't walk all day really and be off property that wasn't somebody that was related to me. You know, that was part of that, that growing up. I didn't think about, you know, just wandering and going, playing, whatever. And it was in apple orchards. We only had a few thousand trees directly related to us, which we were small potatoes. My father was a plumber, and you were talking about how people know Hendersonville. He had a key ring this large
Everybody's house.
to all the people that he opened and closed for the season. We would go drain their house in the fall. When they would leave, they'd call, and then we would open it up in the spring. So yeah, that was a big piece of his work, was working for the folks that were visiting, because there were so many people who were transplants there, or at least seasonal transplants in that area, and it's continued to explode. At one time they were plowing up apple trees about 1,000 acres a year to build houses because so many people were moving into that area. So it's changed like everywhere else has changed. The irony was, I was there when Interstate 26 opened. I was in first grade when it opened down the mountain. That was a big deal.
Yeah, I remember.
And they put the first hotel at Four Seasons Boulevard, right above our, you know, my house was about 4 miles from there. And everybody said, who's going to stay out in the country here? Now there's about 7 or 8 hotels right at that exit, and it's just exploded. But I think about that every time I think about in 2002 when I was here, and we opened the interstate going up the mountain.
That's right.
Interstate 26, same thing, and it was, instead of going down, we were going up, and same sort of thing. So I watched as the Comfort Inn came in here and had the first hotel. So I had sort of some deja vu happening of where I had grown up and then being here in this setting as the interstate changes the community, and people find it that never found it before. I think that's what happens.
Was a start, for example, for people to come out to see.
Yes, they could find it
easily. You went to East Henderson High.
Went there.
And how did you know where you wanted to go to college?
Well, that's interesting. I was always involved in church growing up, mainly because it got us out of farm work. That was the only thing you could do that was okay not to be working was if you were at church. So we were at church a lot. Rural church out in Dana. And then, but I grew up involved in doing all the typical things you do in a Baptist church growing up, but I didn't, never assumed would be doing what I was doing. But my pastor retired after 39 years, my senior in high school. And I ended up, they called it interim, but basically for a month before our interim could start, someone had to fill in. And I didn't preach but once, but I led the service, I was in charge of the service, and they had guest preachers come. And so that was my first entree sort of into that, I guess. I still had no interest, except that they started a scholarship for my pastor at Gardner Webb. Said that, I had no idea where I would go to college. Shouldn't you take that scholarship and go? And so I did.
You went to Gardner Webb? And
went for 1 year. It was fun, but not very academically good. I was so glad after I transferred to find out that C's transferred, and that I was very pleased because I had made about all C's. I had a great year being off the farm and on there's a bunch of other guys out playing all the time. I thought that was a great thing until they started checking grades, and then I found out.
So after Gardner Webb, where did you go?
Transferred to Appalachian State after my freshman year of fun, and then that's when, after I arrived there at Boone, living with my childhood best friend, he'd already gone there, and so we had an apartment together, and got involved in the BSU there, and met a campus minister who told me, who after talking with him, he found out I had some history in church work. First Baptist Boone was looking for a youth minister, and they were wanting to look at possibly students part-time. And he said, I can't recommend you because I really don't know you, but I wanted to let you know about the job. I applied and received the job. I can't tell you how. It shouldn't have really happened. It was, except the lack of experience of the other candidates is the only thing I can say. And they really, similar to Mars Hill at the time, Baptist, they were very, had a lot of professors, others that really paid attention to, knew how to mentor a young minister. The pastor died of cancer. I came there in October. Bob Mann, who was a Mars Hill alum, and his wife Jen, he was a super guy in his 40s and 3 teenage children, and he had developed cancer about 6 months earlier, they found, and he died that, I went there in October, he died in December.
God, you were there crucial
Just
time.
6 weeks with him, and had only got to really meet him a couple of times and know him. But it was really hard. He'd been there 12 years, church loved him, done some good stuff. A year later, the minister of music died of a heart attack in his sleep. So they were just in need of ministers. It had nothing to do with, and they were gracious to me and taught me about doing ministry, and actually let me work full time. I finished in Appalachian, my senior year, the psychology department let me do a internship at the church, and so I was able to work full time basically for 2 years, or a year, my senior year there. I worked full time just because they just needed people to go to hospitals and to
don't put yourself down. You were there at a great time for you and for them too.
It was very good, but they were, not every church, I've learned about educational churches that are on educational institution property act differently than other churches. 2 things. Theologically, they're able to tolerate a lot.
Yes. Yes.
And I say that in a healthy way. They are able to be broad
Right.
and deal with change. They don't, it's not this way, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
That was great. And the other thing was great was they knew how to mentor people. They'd worked with young people all their lives, so they knew how to mentor. George Miles told me, the biology professor, he said, Tommy, the accent can stay, but the grammar has to improve. And so, I had a lot of those kind of people helping me.
Good.
And that made all the difference in the world. They were also the people who, after I had stayed a year after graduation, who said, all right, where are you going to seminary?
And you hadn't thought of it yet.
Not even crossed my mind, but these folks knew
They
that needed to happen. And they made helped me make some plans to check out where I would do that.
And did you go immediately to Southern?
I stayed a year with the church
Okay.
after, and
Yeah.
then went to Southern Seminary. And that was in the heart of
Oh my.
Baptist coming unglued, which was a new
difficult
life.
time for you. And that was a difficult time for that school as well.
So-
Was
Yeah.
Professor Muller still there when you were there?
Moeller,
Oh, I mispronounced
you're
it.
talking about the
Yeah.
the president now was a student when I was there. He was doing his PhD, I knew Al, or just,
Yeah.
as an acquaintance there. I didn't have him as a grader, but he was a grader with friends of mine.
Right.
He was a student there. Roy Honeycutt was president, and I was there when Molly Marshall, who was the famous,
Yes.
knew Molly, still know her well. She, they were deciding whether a female could teach theology,
Oh, yes.
and did not grant her tenure.
Yeah.
I was in that meeting. I was one of the students. They never closed a trustee meeting before, but they did then,
Yeah.
to vote for her not to have tenure. So it was tenuous times there. Southeastern had already, the president had been ousted and things had happened there. So in the middle of that was when I was at the seminary, and it was interesting times to sort of develop who you're going to be going out into this Baptist world that looks very different than it had for the previous 50,
Yeah.
60 pretty consistent years. The thing I have to give credit to them for is for them paying for my education. There was no way you had a 3.5-year Master of Divinity level education at Southern Seminary that was incredible. That basically I had a scholarship from the seminary beyond what they were paying, and I had another grant from a group out of Virginia, the Cassie Fund, that paid for any North Carolina and Virginia students who would go. And so basically I paid living expenses, but my tuition and all that was covered, and that was a gift for lots of us. I mean, there was hundreds of students receiving that, going to seminary, and that was really an educational gift that was amazing, for a lot of us.
How did you negotiate all this turmoil going on around you when you knew that the denomination was in this terrible state of flux? How did that happen? How was that for you as a student?
It was interesting. We chartered a group on campus because we really didn't have a voice. There was a conservative voice because I guess they felt left out, and most of the professors were, pretty progressive in what they did. But I don't think they were opposed to any of the conservatives or stifled them anyway. But they developed an evangelical forum, they called it. And we really didn't have a voice. So when things started happening, changing, and there was no voice, we developed a group, me and about 3 others, called the Students for the Southern Baptist Alliance, once the Alliance was just starting. And so Henry Crouch from Charlotte came up to meet with us when he heard we wanted to start this. And 4 of us met with him. Brent Walker, who ended up being in charge of the Baptist Joint Committee on Public Affairs, was an attorney, had come to seminary, and he wrote up papers, and we had an official. Henry Huff was an attorney there in Louisville, and he met with us and helped us get started. So I had met Henry, the 2 Henrys that were important in the next step of my life. So that was really great. But they came and we started this group, and it was amazing. That group, I got to know a lot of important Baptist people, and it became the way that you could be faithful to what you felt was true, and still feel like you were going to be okay in the bigger Baptist world.
Right.
That there was not, you weren't alone out there.
Were you considered renegades?
Oh yes, our group was almost everybody else trying to stay in the middle. We're not, you're okay, but we're not going to go that far to say this is wrong. We're not going to draw lines. And we were saying, when you tell somebody because of their gender they can't be called, there's a problem here. We've got to stand up for that. And we did. And I had people call me aside at seminary, said, you'll never go work for a Baptist church if you're marked this way. I was told that clearly. And when I did, you had to fill out when you got ready to leave a form, and I put that on my form, chartered the Students for the Southern Baptist Alliance, and I was called in the office 2 times over there. They said, don't send that out. When I left seminary, I went to work at Providence in Charlotte as youth minister, and I was the highest paid student leaving seminary when I left there. So all of that to say, I guess it didn't hurt me too bad. It was all right. They had 2 or 3 who were going as pastors who were really shocked that this church in Charlotte could pay a youth minister more than anybody would pay some of these First Baptist pastors.
Let me ask you a question. Did you feel, Earl Lange said to me, and Paige said to me one time that when people asked him about their credentials in Southern, they were always trying to be sure that it was clarified at what era.
When you were there.
Because people have associated it in many ways with the turmoil period, and that was not a happy time. When you refer to your training there, do you ever qualify?
When I was there?
Yes.
Well, the interesting piece is they've never sent me a piece of information since. I never get any alumni giving anything like that.
Are you surprised?
No, I'm not. It was interesting. When I went so far, by going to, at the time Providence was known as a church that was on the other side. And
yes.
No, I was never sent any follow-up, anything to the seminary. They always just sort of said, see ya, and I didn't have any connection since, except to say all the people that were there at the time that trained me. I've kept in touch with a lot of them. Still do a class with Bill Leonard, still keep up with a number of others. Jim Blevins was a great friend.
And he was here.
Yes, and he called as soon as I came to Mars Hill, and I had to stop whenever I would go to Chicago to see Jim. I had to stop in Louisville. But so all those people were important, but that institution, it was a sad piece. The interesting thing for me was because I never knew it out of controversy, that I didn't have that deep love that so many others had of the place.
Right. Yeah.
The people I loved and still care for deeply and still keep up with and want to know. But the place didn't. I loved, enjoyed Louisville, had a good experience there, but never had that love that so many had, that they would go back for conferences and be there and just enjoy all those years, because it arrived with me, when the controversy was happening. Randall Wally was leaving at Southeastern when I arrived at Southern, so I was in the middle of it. But you were saying, I remember sitting with Randall at a lunch at one time. I was sitting right beside him. We were talking when somebody came up with their Southeastern diploma that had happened they were there for 2 years with him and one with someone else. And they had whited out the current president's name and asked if he would sign their diploma. So it was that kind of, you know, there was just a terrible schism at that point.
I remember, I have felt all the years in hearing your sermons that you have seemed to let us know in the congregation that you feel very good about your education there. Mm-hmm. That you had great people, great professors, great classes, and that they helped in many ways to form, if not your thinking, ways to help you to find where you were on issues and so forth. So actually it was if you could put negatives versus positives, you really got lots of positives.
Oh, the faculty was still in place. You know, they didn't fall apart really until, as I was leaving, that's when they started the next 2-3 years. They totally, you know, turned around. So when I was there, it was still the ones that were still
it was
still a great place. And like, again, to get to tell what Baptists were giving young people for education at that time and giving it to them really was just remarkable. We'll never see that again.
And that's disappointing even to acknowledge.
When students come out now of all of these great institutions we developed, but when they come out with a $50,000 debt,
yes,
at best for a Master of Divinity, that is hard to make up in a long time. Yeah. I mean, you just can't make the numbers of your salary or whatever work for that. That's really hard.
Let me ask you, you mentioned that things had happened that you were sort of propelled forward based on circumstances and incidents around you. At what point did you feel that indeed, to use the old Baptist term, that you had gotten a call to be a minister? Mm-hmm. Did that happen? Was that some aha moment, or was it, how did that happen?
It was definitely more of a process moment when I had these people that were talking to me about your skill at this, you're good at this.
They had already seen this.
They had, and I tell people now, that's why we talk about at church a lot about calling, because I said, calling doesn't happen in a vacuum. I don't think it happens, even in the biblical stories, you don't see that it happens exclusive, that person suddenly, the Paul thing gets blown up way too much. I think it's much more of the community calling Joshua out saying, we think you're the one, help us lead it, we vote for you. Right. And so mine was much more that kind of calling, that it was the people saying, we like the way you do this, now let's help you learn to do it better. Good. And I think that happened all through, from the time I was in high school through with people both in public school and in my church, all the way up through to my church folks were the least surprised when I was going to be ordained. I was much more surprised than any of them were.
So, it was all happening, and yes, I'm right there, I'm going to do it, it just happened.
And they were like, we're just waiting for the date. And then again, the Boone folks were that way. And then as I went on to seminary, it continued to be that way. And I think people given the opportunity to do that will do that as well for young people. I call it a culture of calling. If you set that up for people, then that happens. If you don't, though, encourage and say to people, we're the last vestige of place in the world, I think, where children can fail and still be okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Everywhere else in their lives, they're judged so much on testing in schools, right, in their athletics, in the drama, whatever it is. There's this, either you do well or you're out. We're the one place where I've seen them get up on Sunday morning and do a terrible job. But people come up and say, thanks for doing that. Yeah. We're so grateful you did. Even if it was awful, we still encourage them, we still help them. And often they come on to be the one that does that. So church has that incredible ability to do it if we let people do it. Now, one of the things churches have done, in my years of watching it, is that professionalism takes over. And we get afraid to let people have a chance, a young person or a child, or even an old person who hasn't had experience to do that.
Hey, do you feel that our church has reached that point?
I hope not. I don't think so. I think we do have a level of professionalism we like to see things show, right. But I think there's a point where does it become the model which we try to follow, or does it become the standard which we have to have? And I hope it doesn't ever become that standard that excludes people from
I agree.
giving an opportunity.
Tell me at what point you met Tanya.
We were in Boone at Appalachian.
So you met in Boone?
In the Baptist Student Union there. We were good BSU
Oh yeah,
active.
so was I.
And there's, I'm shocked how many folks, friends and all that did, but we were active there and became, I was, in there, she was in there. She was older than me, 3 years older. So she'd been there a while. She was an experienced. So I came there not knowing any better. So she just snagged me, I tell her, I was poor innocent, had no clue. She was the senior who grabbed me. I was just a sophomore and didn't know better. And so, but we were married within a year of being there.
So you were there students, married students?
Yes, she graduated. The rule was we had started dating and then we were engaged, and I said, you'll have to have a job if we're going to get married, and she did.
And she got a
The
job.
job came the next day, and
That was fast.
she was ready. And so we got married at First Baptist. The youth in the church were our ushers and did our reception for us and did everything. So that was a lot of fun. And,
So she was with you during the seminary days.
so she was the reader. I have a learning disability that affects my ability to read.
Ah.
I'm not a great reader. I have to really work at reading.
Yeah.
And in seminary, I learned that was a problem in a hurry. I could make it through college with that. I had enough techniques. Had a couple of professors again who helped me with that. But she was an excellent reader. She reads 200 or 300 pages a night.
Mm.
And so my seminary books found its way on her table so that when I'm footnoting, I could say, I know this author said this, but she was able to say, oh, that's on page. She had that kind of memory.
Oh, wonderful.
So she helped footnote many papers from seminary. She was the one who drug me through the reading part of seminary. Was really tough on me, and she made that happen. But
would she offer, sometimes when you were preparing sermons, would she ever offer a dissenting view or commentary or whatever?
usually it was after it became public in the service that it became, and I could even hear her, above anyone else. I knew that. I knew what her voice was like, but it was like, well, maybe that's not. I did make a promise to all the family to say, I never tell a story on any of them without their permission to do it. I don't, I just am not, I tell a lot of their stories, but I always get their here's what I'm going to say, and here's what we're going to do, and they've had a few times, only a few times that they've said, no, and probably they were more correct than I did.
I love hearing you tell your stories about your family, your mom and your dad.
Oh.
Because those are great stories, and they always give a clue to, your background, your bringing up, the way they saw life, and the way that we are affected by our parents and the things they give to it. Those become important things.
My mother was a 39-year lunchroom lady.
Yes, you told about that.
Which was not, it was just amazing.
I'm amazed today because one of the things we are so attuned to today is that lunchrooms are no longer like they were.
Oh no, she cooked, they cooked everything.
Yes, they really cook. Today it's packaged and you don't know.
That's right.
It's not the same.
I saw a young man at my refereeing soccer career that I enjoyed when I was at my home high school, which I rarely go back once. And he's the vice principal, and his last name's, he is a Justus. We're not related close, it's a distant. And I said something to a young man, and I said something about, you're a Justus, friend. He said, yeah. He said, actually my family grew up down, and he named a little community not far from where I grew up. And I said, well, I grew up in Dana. And he said, oh, and I said to him, did you go to Dana to the elementary school? He said, oh, yes. And then I said, well, my mother worked. He said, tell me, was your mother Miss Justus in the lunchroom? I said, oh, yes. He said that every weekend, his family's very poor. And he said, we really just didn't have much at all. And he said, your mother, I have a jar still of 50-cent pieces. He said, every Friday, in my little pocket of my jacket, your mother would drop by and drop a 50-cent piece in it. Oh. So that I'd have something for the weekend. And she said, I never spent them. I kept them. And he had a jar of those. And he said his son recently tried to get those to go cash in for something, and he said, I kept them, and said, no, those are special 50-cent pieces that my mother had every Friday would come by his jacket and just check on him, and he said, I'd go away from the room, and there would be a 50-cent piece in my jacket every time.
What a wonderful story. And nowadays, the 50-cent piece is a rare thing to find.
Oh, it is anyway. But I guess she thought that would help him buy something for the weekend to, get through the thing, so she had that kind of heart.
Well, you had not started your doctoral work until after you came to Marcy. Before though we get to that point, you mentioned you were in Charlotte, and at what point did you and Tanya start your family? Because the children were small when you came.
Tori was born, we were in seminary when Tori was, our oldest, was born the last year we were there.
Right.
And then we went to Charlotte. Tanya was pregnant actually when we had our son Isaac, and then the third one came along in Charlotte as well. So when they came here, Troy was second grade, Isaac was still preschool, and Cassie was 2, because she doesn't recall anywhere else.
Yeah, no, I remember when you came, all the children, you brought the children with you, and we were also impressed, here were 3 young children who were going to start their life in a place, and my concern always is for young children is, are they going to like it, if they are transplanted? Because they were probably too young to.
They really weren't. They don't really. Troy remembers Charlotte, but no, Isaac and Cassie really didn't. One of the funniest stories happened right after I came. Isaac, Janet had a space in the preschool here at Marshall, at the Methodist Church for him, and so he's in there, and it was, they would do a little section on Mother's Day. When Mother's Day is coming up in May, they try to do a Father's Day, but they're out in the summer, so they do one. And so she called me, she said, we did this thing on Fathers, and I'm confused about what your son thinks you do. And I said, why? And she said, well, when we were in Charlotte, Isaac was allergic as a child to tomatoes and to dairy and all these things. And we had an owner of a Chinese restaurant in our church. And when you're allergic to a lot of things, Chinese didn't use a lot of those things. So every Sunday we ate lunch with the Yao family, who became our close friends. And they had the restaurant. And so the last Sunday we were there, they had a big to-go thing. We were gone, Well, my son had put together that I worked on Sundays in the restaurant. And so when they were going around, and she said, not too many, a lot of children at 3 and 4 years don't know what their father does. But your son raised his hand immediately. And I said, well, what? And he said, my dad works at a Chinese restaurant. And she said, why does your son think you work at a Chinese restaurant? And it took me a while to say, I think I know why he thinks I work, because I work, and I was involved with the youth, so Tammy had them in the other part of the church. Really crossed over, so he thought my son.
Close to each other.
Oh yeah. So, but they were that age when we came here, so they don't. When Cassie graduated, it was hard on a lot of other people in the church, because they could remember her being so small, and then being this old. That
I know. They've grown up in front of our eyes, and charming children. I've been so impressed that Isaac got about as far away from.
Oh, in Seattle. That's right.
I know you've been out there several times, and we'll talk about them a little bit later on, but I was, interested, obviously, how did you hear about the job at Marshall Church?
It's an interesting story. Henry Krauss retired from Providence, and Chuck Bugg came from Southern Seminary, all those people leaving seminary, he was a preaching professor up there, left there to come pastor with us. And he was good friends with Henry Huff, who I talked about, who was here now, in Marcio, who had retired back here. And Henry was on the committee searching, and somebody on the committee, I never knew who it was, had put in, and he was checking a reference on that person. They were, I think Chuck even was supervising their doctorate ministry program, or being a supervisor. And so he was checking on that person, and Chuck said to Henry, there's somebody here you ought to look at. And so Chuck called me down and told me he was doing that, or he'd done that. And I said, Chuck, I can take that 2 ways. He said, you probably should. Because I wasn't the easy, he loved me, he'd been here a number of times, but I wasn't the easiest to supervise, you could imagine. I had a lot of fun, and Chuck was a very sort of tight way he did his program, and I was not. And so I had a lot of fun with Chuck, and he wasn't always as entertained as I was. But we had a good time together. But he's the one who suggested he and I had talked a lot, and he was a great preaching professor in that I'd never had him at the seminary, but he could preach, and then the Monday morning when I would come in and talk to him about it, he could tell you exactly how he had laid that sermon together. You know, I've had great preaching professors who were just wow you, but they couldn't put the nuts and bolts of it for you to look at. Chuck could do that, and he did that with me for about 6 months. And on Mondays we'd meet and talk about his Sunday sermon and how he did it. So I had sort of private tutoring as I was getting into this.
Did you feel good about that? Did you feel that was helpful to you?
Oh, it changed everything, definitely.
How did it change you?
It changed because he helped me develop. When you go in preaching in a class with 20 other people and you're just doing one sermon and then you get it critiqued and you learn about how people do sermons, there's this expectation that you're going to follow this one of 2 or 3 models of preaching. And that's terribly confining for preaching. Preaching, I think, has to develop more of who you are to really be productive. And so we were able to do that, or I was able to do that with Chuck, saying, you know, I can't do that, Chuck. But he said, but think about ways you could use this. He taught me a lot, you know, his basic thing was, here's what happens in a sermon. You're moving from A to B.
Right. How
are your transitions? Because that's the important part. If people won't come with you, you don't have anything.
Yeah, sure.
All my notes on Sunday, I have my transitions. That's all I have down. Manuscripts killed me. Everybody at seminary, you had to do manuscripts and I would just read them. I had no connection. I couldn't. He said, you don't need to do one. You can't, you know, and reading was hard again for me. So he said, you know, you spend so much energy, you lose your connection with the folks. So I had that private kind of tutoring to help me find where was my voice in there? Where were the important things I needed to hold on to? And he always taught that, you know, it starts with the scripture. That's always anything else, the topic of the day is not where you will be. You know, that's here and gone, but the scripture will be the thing that will stay permanent.
Do you feel him about a lectionary?
Not as long as I keep it, like I said, the scripture is the thing. Okay. The thing about the lectionary that helps me, and I'm not a diehard lectionary, as you know from seeing, but it keeps us from staying in your favorites all the time.
Yes, you're right.
I mean, that's where we use lectionary. And it helps in worship planning that Sharon, the associate pastor, can work ahead. Right. She likes to, you know, she knows what she's doing 6 months from now.
At least you almost have to think that.
And yes, and so she can do that, and I can be within that realm without being tied down to this is where you're going to be. And so, no, it hasn't hemmed me in. It freed me really to say, you know, okay, I can't just do whatever is your favorite all the time. I can't just stay in Mark. I can't just stay in whatever.
It's interesting though. For not long ago, I had heard you speak, and then I went to hear it the very same day a service in another church in the same lecture. You know, same script. And I knew all that. I just hadn't thought about it. Now, my goodness, how interesting it is that there's this awareness out there among churches that there's a plan. There should be a plan with regard to keeping it fresh. Not only for the congregation, but for the minister that does it. I will tell you, Tony, and I have used you as an example often in a very positive way. One of the things that works for me so well about your sermons, and sometimes I feel like, I don't always feel like they're sermons, I feel like they're messages that you bang here and there.
Stick around.
Anyway, no, that's a positive thing. Is that you're not note bound, you're not hung up on your notes. So often when you go and see someone read a sermon, you see the person reading, his focus is on something you can't see. So already your attention is diminished.
Sure,
there's a step in between.
Yeah, where is he in that? Yeah.
He's not connecting with you, he's connecting with the paper.
Right.
Well, that's not always true, but in some cases that does happen. So that works wonderfully for you, not to be hung up in your notes. I always feel I can connect.
And I think that's part of if I'd have had more education in the drama field, probably would have been helpful for that, because I think that's where folks I've known who've done that as part of their training have helped them, because they were able to. It's taken me a long time to learn the cues from the audience and those kind of things that I would have probably known earlier.
I used to say, and I've said this over and over, and I used to give lectures on this, that every teacher, every lawyer, and every minister ought to be forced to take the basic acting class, because they're in front of the public all the time. they would learn all the tricks that actors use.
No doubt, no doubt.
And it would be helpful. But, you know, as my colleague Jim Thomas has always said, the good minister is going to make the church like a theater anyway. He's going to do the same thing as a play does.
You won't
He's
get
going to
emotion
invite,
of it, that's right.
that's right, he invites you in, he holds your attention, he has something to say when you walk out, remembering if it's been a good sermon along the way. So that is a very successful thing. I know
Jim Blevins came the closest to helping me
really?
with that.
What did he offer you?
Well, because drama was how he taught New Testament, how he taught Mark, how he taught Revelation, how he taught everything was to come in, often dressed in costume.
Really?
Oh, yes, frequently in class. You got Caiaphas showed up and he had and he would hold that the whole time. We could ask questions and we would.
He was in character.
Oh, the whole time, and he could do it beautifully. But, you know, that learning that happened in that piece, that it was more than just, you know, here we are reading the book and the text, but that he was very clear that the New Testament was given in an oral culture, and that if we tried to limit it to the page, two things, you lost but the spirit of the bigger piece was just to limit to the page, but the big piece was the spirit. You lost the spirit of it. You could just get to reading the Bible. And he said that's where, as Southern was falling apart at the time, people he thought were selling the Bible short when they were saying, oh, it's just inerrant. Well, the Bible's bigger than what I'm reading on this page, according to him. You know, he understood it, that the Bible was much more alive and living within us than it was just what's on this page. He said, if you were just sticking to that, then you were missing the point.
Well, he was probably considered a heretic.
Oh, by far. But he hung in there. It was funny that he stayed longer than anyone else.
Interesting.
Stayed longer than anyone else.
You have to admire that, because obviously he must have felt that he could do something good.
The students that had him all along, he was very biblically based, so it didn't matter which side of that you happened to land on. That he could argue the Greek with you all day. So as long as you had that, it was
Okay, you heard about Mars Hill. And of course you already knew it because you knew the area.
Had been here as a senior in high school for the student government conference. It still goes on.
Still goes on.
And the leader of it still checks in with me. So when he's here, he remembers when I was high school student body president coming up here.
I remember that. So you have a link already. So let me ask you, interrupt and ask you a question that has nothing to do with this. In a way it does. Do you feel, and this is biblical and it may not be biblical, that there is a master plan for lives? In other words, this is not the Presbyterian concept. I'm not talking about predestination. But that there is some sense of, as you have talked about things happen to you. And they seem to happen in a logical sequence.
Oh, yeah.
Each one was preparing you for the next step.
I think there's no question. I have no question that I can, and it's always a 20/20 looking back.
Yes, of course.
But, because I'd be scared to death if you gave it to me forward. But, no, I have a clear thing that at least in my experience, it's been that there's been a clear plan that's been laid out. And, it would have looked crazy up front.
Oh, sure.
But looking back at
in other words, you were supposed to be here.
Oh, I have no doubt.
Okay, you were supposed to be. Let me ask you, has there ever been any formal affiliation of the school with you? Or have they ever employed you to do anything? Or have you ever been asked to be something with the university?
I have a guest ID card.
Yeah, and I know you use a college email.
And a college email. Those are the only two things I've always told. Fred and I talked a little bit, but not really when he left. Dan has talked, and Max too, but Dan as well, about things. But I'm clear where my role is. And that happened 2 or 3 ways. One other one is a great one to tell you about with Sue Fitzgerald. But when I came here, I was clear that I'm not a professor. It's not my style. I don't do that well. I'm a pastor.
Yeah.
And I'm clear about that and have grown into that much better over these years here. And my identity there is not teaching. Julie Noy used to invite me in to try to redeem John Calvin about once a semester, because she'd say, I've done him in, come tell me something good he's done. And so I would come over and do a class for her. And I do that a lot. I've done, probably at least once or twice a semester. Mark Mullen actually asked me for the youth ministry class to come on. But I come and do classes and speak in chapel and different things, but never had an official title, and never sought or wanted that, because I really think there's a difference between what you want from your pastor than what you need from a professor. And I think the same in counseling. When I came here, Sue Fisher was interim.
That's right.
And was great help. She helped me find my way in the community in a big way. But the one thing that we argued about was, and it's hard to argue with Sue as a young, but I have 2 units of clinical pastoral education. I thought that was the area I was trained by Wayne Oates as a great Marshall. At Southern, I have my credentials there. My degree says pastoral care and counseling. I have all that. And so when I came here, I said, now tell me our resources for referring people. And she said, you're it. You'll be the counselor for everyone. And I said, no, I won't, Sue. That's not a good role. And she said, well, you've got the credentials. I said, no, I'll refer people, but they need a pastor to be a pastor. And they need a counselor to be that. I said, and then if I'm their counselor, and I worked with a pastor once who tried to be that. And the problem was when he would use an illustration that was totally innocent, but somebody would identify, oh, well, you were telling about my story.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And he would say, no, I had nothing, but they heard one piece in there that caught them, and I learned then that I'm a good referral. I can meet with someone and say, here's the issue. I've got a whole group of people we'll talk to.
I know.
But I am not. I don't need to be your once a week counselor to talk to that, because that's a different role. And I think it's similar with the professor role. I think students that would come and see me and talk, they needed something different. And people often say, how have you preached with PhDs like the Paisleys and all that? And I said, the preaching event's very different than the teaching, than the professor event on the campus.
Yeah, you have worked with Bond Scholars, though, for example. What have you done with the Bond Scholars?
Now, that's probably been the most connection. That and athletes. David calls me their volunteer chaplain, I guess, for all the sports teams, because I worked with them, as we talked about a little earlier, still have kept up. But then the Bonner Scholars, what I found is no longer do we just have what I guess they called the preacher boys years ago, but the religion department had those ministers, and they weren't just boys, they were males and females, that were going to head toward service and often in ministry. I think now most of them that end up coming here often come through the Bonner program. And Miss Bonner, that's the way she started it, was to help particularly young people who couldn't afford to go to a university, to be able to go there, and instead of playing a sport or having an academic prowess, to be able to do service so they could come to the university. I mean, that was her whole view of that. And so we were one of the first to become one of those Bonner institutions. And I've worked with them in Princeton a good bit. It's been a great blessing to be able to do that, and worked with a number of transitions of the Bonner program here. But all of them have had this sense of how do we do service in while we're along with our education, and how does it integrate into it more than just a service. And I think the church obviously is the place where that can happen for folks. We have an argument once in a while, but it's funny, the top Bonner people never have a question about us doing stuff. Now, there have been churches that try to you can't come here unless you say these words or get this kind of a statement, then you're not able to get the services. They don't handle any of that. But other than that, we've always been able to say, no, we're going to help you. We don't care.
What kinds of specific things have you done with the Bonner Scholars, for example?
Well, I'm their freshman. I take the freshman trip with them.
Okay, which is?
We go to Charleston every year and work out on Bulls Island.
Really? What do you
have
do
a great chance.
What do you do there?
Dennis Hyatt is one of the lead volunteers in there, so he's the one that started us in that. But it's a natural preserve, and you can go and bike and do other things, and they always are in need of help to make this thing happening. And so we go and do physical labor. They have a wolf house. Last year we were able to rebuild the wolf, go in the pen with the gray wolves. They have the gray wolves there. Woke up a few of them. They were a little nervous, but a lot of these Bonners have come from tough home situations, but most of them never have a tool in their hand.
Yeah.
Never have done any physical labor, built a ramp, built something, and so, well, you get one out of the whole class. And so we get them doing that. We also work with, they work with one of my daughter who teaches down there, her class, they go in and teach or do some projects with them, so they get to do some things of that nature. And mainly it's just a place to go to give them an opportunity to see something different, and but to learn in a new way instead of in the academic classroom. We get them in a true service place, but it's them together. Up to this point, their service has been, here and there and here and there, but then they work together as a team. That's pretty
How
cool.
many do you usually take in?
There's usually about 15 of them, something like that.
So it's a manageable group.
Yeah, it's a fun. I've learned in my years of doing 50 on a trip is not, I know why Jesus just had 12. There's a reason for that. That's a good size. That's a good size.
Well, I watched you over the years, and you've taken groups to Chicago, to New York, to Washington on a regular basis. These are these young people here in Mars Hill. I cannot help but believe that these experiences that you've taken to go work in churches they have opened their eyes to a whole part of life that they would never see here.
Oh yeah.
What have you taken away from that as the minister who's planned all that? What has it brought to you?
Well, I was surprised when I first came here. I met with youth on Sunday night. That was my deal. I told them, my high school group that I still meet with every week. They knew about my history of going mainly to Chicago at the times where I was going, and they knew that, and they wanted to go immediately. And that September, the next year, they wanted to go, and I said, I don't know. This rural group, we'll go to Chicago, how that'll be. That's a tough city, and I was working in the big city in Charlotte, a very diverse group, and so I did it. I said, we'll go, and I arranged the trip, and the same church I'd worked with for a number of years up there, and so we went, and I was shocked, totally shocked. It was a learning experience for me. I shouldn't have been so shocked. I grew up rural and the same experience, but my kids in Charlotte were very diverse. I had, as many African Americans as I did, Caucasian kids as I did. I had kids from the Middle East. I had kids from Africa. I had all kind of kids in my youth group there. We looked like part of the world. So when we'd go into Chicago, we didn't look quite so standout. This group stood out. But what I wasn't planning on was how connected they could be, because they'd grown up in this rural culture, by not thinking they knew a stranger, by being able to adapt to people that were different age groups. My kids in Charlotte had dealt with people that were their age, and so they didn't know how to talk to a 90-year-old or a 9-month-old, they didn't. So I take this group in there, and they're on the L train, immediately talking to the next person over, where are you from, and what's your name? And they didn't know better than to do that, and they connected much better, much more quickly than my crew from Charlotte ever did, because they had the gift that I think comes from being in a rural community that's not so huge. We had 150 in our youth group down there, so they didn't have to talk to an older person when they went to church. Here, they had to talk to people that were older and younger and different, and they went to school with people that were poor. And so, everybody financially was pretty much the same, and I think that's the biggest divide in the country still. I don't think it has to do with skin color. I think it has to do with economics. And I think that these kids could talk, they had friends that were poor, so it didn't scare them to talk to this person who smelled, who didn't, who looked pretty rough being on the streets, that they would just talk to them. They figured, hey, they're a person, we're going to talk. And they'd usually yell at me and say, did you know she has a relative that lives in Asheville? That was always, that they knew how to do that, which my kids in Charlotte didn't have that kind of skill.
Were you nervous? They were so open?
Oh gosh, well, yes, a little bit, but that openness got them into the communities I've worked with in Chicago and DC and in Brooklyn, all terribly divided by violence and race and other things. I've never been threatened in those communities, and had groups there who had not been either. And I think it has to do with this assumption that, we all want the same thing for our children. We all are people, basically. And if you go in with that, I've never had the problem of that, of having any violence issues on our group, never had any. There's always a level, where you, especially the first year, of being concerned, are they going to be misunderstood? Are they going to be, but I haven't found that happen. I think there was a sense of, hey, they're people just like us. And I tell you, the part that scares me most in this country now is suburban living. Suburbs scare me more than going into a city or being out here in a rural area, because we do isolate, like it was in Charlotte. We do isolate economically.
Yes.
It's not isolation because of our skin color. What we had, again, we had so many people that were all that color, but that economic isolation is what's dangerous, I think. Then it tells us that these people are different from us. It tells us that people on the south side of Chicago that are living in a project are different than I am. And when they meet them and do Bible school, do a summer camp with them, and they're there, they learn, well, that kid's the same. We play games together. We have, he likes to go fishing. He likes things that I like. We can be friends and have fun. And there's not a division that in that suburban mentality that teaches you that it's not. When I got to teach one year in Atlanta for a pastor school, and I had seminary students that were from the suburbs, and then I had these black pastors from Atlanta. And I could talk with the black pastors because I said, you understand why when I go to the grocery store, it takes me an hour to go get one or two things.
You see it right enough.
And they said, oh yeah, no problem. And the people in the suburbs said, where are you going? We can drive through and get that. And I said, I can go to the post office, which is a block from the church, and it takes me an hour.
Yes.
And they said, you've got an inefficient program. The kids did. Now, the black pastor said, we know exactly why you can't do that. They were in neighborhoods in Atlanta, and they were pastoring in their neighborhoods. And I said, we've lost that. Neighborhoods, when we go to Chicago, work just like, they know who we are. They know where we're from, that we're not from there, but why we're there. They know we're working with the church, and they protect us if nothing else. And we're easy to protect because we're the only white people there, but they know, and I've never, I feel like if something were to happen, we would be handled very quickly. It would not be a threat. But in the suburbs, I wouldn't feel that way. I tell people when I go into New York and we go to Brooklyn and work with our community over there, that's either Hasidic Jew or black, are the two in that community. Never feel it. But when I go to Manhattan, I'm nervous.
Interesting.
Because I said Manhattan's where all the crazy people that couldn't fit in their community or wherever they were have shown up. But it's not the natives of New York.
That's right.
Brooklyn, those are natives of New York, and I can go there and feel perfectly fine.
I notice you have not taken this many trips to New York. You go more to Washington and Chicago.
Well, our church in Brooklyn, ironically, had a number of Caribbeans that were undocumented. And the current situation in our country has caused angst among them, and so they haven't been able to do as much as they had done. As well, at the same time, and I've kept up with Ken, the pastor, they had a stroke. They've been trying to struggle through getting that going when it's a small church and doesn't have a lot of resources. It's tough. And the public housing there, at the same time, has gone through a major transition where we did most of our work. And so we've kept up with them, but we haven't had the entree to go back like we have in DC and Chicago. So we've kept those two, and probably two's about all
Let me ask you,
energy to keep going.
how do you as a minister negotiate? You're talking about suburbs and economics. That's a very interesting concept to me, because I think I would tend to agree with you that most people don't think in those terms. They tend to think of race, color, skin, whatever. How do you deal as a minister? Because I know something about your political leanings. How do you deal without that hopping over into your sermons? But you've got people in Marshall Baptist Church who are all stripes politically.
Sure.
How do you handle that?
Well, I think you come to church for something different. I think I have to keep that in mind every Sunday. That, what I'm coming to church for is to worship God, and that's the first thing, the most important thing. We talk about that every Sunday. And so if I'm not starting there, politics, enters into that. It can't help it with us. But if it enters into as a drawing lines, then there's a problem. If it enters into that this person's in need of help and I have resources I can help them, and there's a problem getting that there, then we need to talk about that. But if it's about saying, well, you're different from me because, then I can't do that. So as long as you keep that, I think, as a priority up front, the other sort of falls into place. Now, I get grief.
Oh, I was going to say, I asked you if you got
from, not really from, mainly from the more liberal side.
Because?
That I'm not waving the flag and I'm not putting it out there that, you know, you need to be doing these things. But I tell them that we have a whole, you know, we're all God's children, however your political slant is. But then I have the saying that we have a number of conservatives that come to the church because they are open-minded enough to dialogue.
Yeah.
And feel like they can find that there without finding a criticism, or at least a "you're wrong, I'm right" kind of mentality. Now somebody will tell them, well, no, I don't believe what you say, but they don't feel like they're being, you know.
What is your perception of Marshall Church, Marshall Baptist? What do you think?
It's funny, one of our deacons, she teaches at middle school, says when she tells her children she's a deacon, they always say, oh, you go to that church.
What does that mean?
And well, she wants a shirt. She said, I want a shirt that says we go to that church because of that. The problem is, if you put us on a scale of churches, you know, Protestant churches nationally, we might be the left of center, but not far.
Not far.
But when you put them in this county,
it's liberal.
We're way over here. You know, you look very different when you do the county scale, and that's okay. I think what people can't get away from in the county is how much we have done to help people in the county.
And they know that.
They're clearly aware of that. That we, you know, that our programs always start with the mission of what God's calling us to do.
Yeah.
What are we, you know, can we help feed people in this county? Yes, so how are we going to do that? Can we help house people in this county? Yes, so how are we going to make that happen? Can we help? So using our resources properly, I think, has made a different reputation for us, even if we are that church that, you know, you can come if you're homosexual, or if you're a female in ministry, or if you're whatever, if you don't use the King James Version of the Bible, God forbid, that, you know, if you don't do any of that, that you can still come to our church and worship and be full participation in whatever we do, then a lot of them draw lines on that. But when it comes to the mission of what the church is called to do, they can't argue that we've done that. So when you do that, I think when you start there, then it's hard. Those lines are more important.
I wanted to read to you. I just put together. I went through it. I wanted to see. I've been aware of this for a long time, of course, because I've been there. I'm just my 44th year of membership over there.
Wow.
So I sort of have a little bit of history. I went through and made a list. Here are some of the things that I remember that have happened in Marshall Baptist Church. There was a Hispanic ministry. Is that still there anymore?
Yeah, we still meet with Joe, who's the pastor at the Northview Trailer Park.
Okay. We
still work with him. So we had an intern for him a couple of years ago. We have one this year. You'd be interested. She just graduated from Mars Hill. Jenny Cordoza, she is working with they have a group at the Episcopal Church, 20 undocumented mothers, Mexican mothers. And her mother is Costa Rican and father Puerto Rican. So even though she's not a Spanish major, she grew up speaking.
Yeah.
And she's working with our crew. Next week we'll be going to the water park with them, trying to do some, how do we meet as a group. And recently I'm proud that we, I would say, well, a year ago to get to when all the crazy was happening in the country of undocumented with ICE. Our sheriff and our security on campus, Kevin, and our town police chief all met with our undocumented mothers and helped them understand. They fed them, so they were glad to come. Those mothers can make some unbelievable Mexican food. So we have a group that meets, and then they've met with them a second time to say, how do we work together?
Right.
And how are we? And so we've had very positive, and so out of that has come this summer intern that's working,
right. And
we're trying to do more. So yes, that's continued. In Madison County, it's not a big group. And the other thing is it's definitely a quiet, hidden sort of group. But Madison County did not accept the money from the federal government.
I know.
And so ICE can't just walk in here like they can other counties. So we do have that help. But our sheriff and chief of police, everybody has been clear to say, hey, we're not after you, you know, we're not.
So the undocumented folks here in Madison County feel some sense of calm about.
They know it, yes. We tried to, that was the key, to make them meet those folks so that they can say, hey, it's okay here, I know you, I've met you.
Right.
And I'm not trying to.
That's a huge,
Big difference.
That's a huge difference. In addition to that, there was a tradition of the white gift on Sunday in Advent, and neighbors in need.
Oh, yeah.
On Christmas Day, all the loose people who didn't have any place to go
Sure, but that.
were invited to the Justus home
Oh.
for Christmas lunch. That's a huge gift, Tommy,
Oh,
to the community. There were Sunday evening youth programs, which you mentioned a
Oh,
minute
yeah.
ago. There's the Operation Sound program, the annual mission trips to New York, Chicago, and DC, which I mentioned. Then there's the sister church in Beatrice, Cuba, which has been in, that's been around for a long time.
24 years. They started the year before I came, so.
And
It's been
that's
amazing.
still very much a part of it.
Oh, yeah, we still keep up with Rosala and the group down there. Have, letter writing back and forth and sending, hopefully have a group going in the spring. It didn't look like they could make it for the fall.
That's a huge thing. Then the mission trips to Brazil,
They're there now.
they're there
We
now.
have a group.
Then one of the things that people probably don't think about, because they think of it, you're a minister, this is something you should normally do. But I look back, and over all the years you've been here, there's been a consistent and very vital Bible study series. You've led some, you've brought in ministers, you've brought in college professors, that this has been going on over that whole period, so that everybody in the church, if they want to, can go and partake of a series of studies
Something.
on whatever it's going to be for that particular time. And there was the Operation Inasmuch, which Mike Mosley had for every day. Is that still around, by the way?
Well, yes, somewhat.
So it morphed into something.
It did into a more regular, the Community Housing Coalition came out of that.
Yeah.
We have a Community Housing Coalition here in town, or in the county. And we started it from that ministry that says that they could broker funding from the government and other grants much easier when it wasn't in the church, even though we are a 501c3 ourselves. They were able to get some things that could happen there and coordinate so many other groups. Now we have over 1,000 every summer come here from other churches, individuals who come to work here in the county doing that kind of work. So it's sort of morphed into something even greater.
Was it necessary to apply for the 501c3?
That was a Henry Huff thing, when you have an attorney who's... But the good thing is, we've been able, when we work with MANA, with the food bank, which we do, we're one of the main feeding points in the county for the summer feeding. We do that for children. We do backpacks and all that. Every week, we're sending it to schools. It covers us with the schools somewhat. There are churches who want to get in the schools and do this, but have an ulterior motive.
Yes.
They want to do something else that schools can't. It's not that they wouldn't want to, they just can't. And so, because we're a 501c3, suddenly we can put that on the data that nobody else can do that.
So you have an entree by virtue of the formality.
We are checked off government agents, or cleared by the government agency. So,
and one thing that
it's a nonprofit.
The tape ministry that Anna Hines had for years, is that still around?
Nancy is still taking that. Every Sunday she does. And now, though, we're on the fortunate thing, almost everybody gets it off the web.
Yes.
Because, the services are downloaded on YouTube as soon as they finish.
Yeah.
And
is it a video or is it our...
DVD, yeah. Okay. We take the little, they video it, and then they take the little card and put it in on our computer, and then we put it on, we have our own YouTube station. So every Sunday, I'm only aware the whole service is on there. And what happens is, we could live stream it, but I said there's too many of them that may not get up and come to church. They may just stay there in bed and say, So we can do it right after church. But we have a number. Ruth Anderson was a great example. She would watch it at 11 o'clock next Sunday.
Oh, I see.
So she made her own little station there, and she would watch it at that time. She said she'd get her Bible, and she said, I'd just come and it's as if I was at church when that happened. So then others watch at different times. And then the other good thing about that is when we have something special, like the children are on there or something, then the parents can all pick that up right there. They don't have to try to film it themselves or do something. They can just go on.
We could say Nancy Wood, we were talking about.
Nancy Wood, yes. She was.
That ministry which Anna had for such a long time
Oh,
was
yeah.
was such a huge thing for the shut-ins who couldn't get
Well, the
it.
amazing thing for me was that how they kept up with stuff. When I'd go visit them then, you know, I would get there every couple of weeks and go by them and say, oh yeah, well how did the whatever
They would
go?
know.
And I'd say, oh yeah, Anna's brought you the stuff, so
Yeah.
you know what's going on.
They would know.
They would know.
The Fields of Hope. Susie and AC Honeycutt, and
Did a super job.
that was a super job. How long did that last?
7 years, produced hundreds of thousands of pounds of fresh
How much
vegetables.
property was involved in it?
5 acres.
5 acres.
But they produced on that 5 acres. It was definitely one of the God things because it just kept exploding.
What were the crops?
Potatoes was the best.
Potatoes were best.
When we had the football team go down that year, and they did about 1,000 pounds they did a ton of potatoes in about 20, 30 minutes. They harvested that many.
That's
Because
amazing.
we had all those guys
Yeah.
out there, you know, just pulling them in.
And they probably loved
But,
it.
they had a great time. But we had other crops, obviously. We had tomatoes. We tried, we did squash. Lord, you know, when you grow squash, it goes crazy. We grew some corn, did some other things, but potatoes by far is the most usable crop because it kept well, and everybody can use a potato and has multiple uses.
That's right.
And so we were able to distribute potatoes, which is still the Lord's harvest
That's
that they have.
That's the next
Is a generation down from that. What we found out, Bill wanted to start doing the potatoes when AC and Susie stopped. Well, after 1 year, he had 2 times when the crop was flooded, and you know, we just didn't. He had all these commitments. I'm going to get you potatoes. We found some farms in Michigan that could send us potatoes cheaper than we could grow them.
Really?
And so suddenly there was this question of, so do we spend our effort putting it in the ground and doing that, or do these places keep providing? We'll just use theirs, and we did, and it's still going on. We still give, potatoes go out every month from church I know in a month's time about 500 different individuals touch potatoes that come out of the church. So.
The Lord's Harvest was a project, it still is, with Sharon and Bill Wells. Let me ask you, tell for people who might not know, how does that work? Because I know Manna Food Bank is involved.
They are. Manna brings us food, but Bill does the potatoes, as we said.
Yes.
He's figured out the staples: rice, potatoes. You know, the main carbohydrates that we keep people with, and beans. He has also found a source that can send us beans cheaper than anybody can raise them. And when I say beans, they're already dried when he gets them. Yeah. And so what he gets is huge bags, and then he uses volunteer groups to divide it into usable parts. And then we distribute them. They distribute them every month. And there's 2 different places in the county that some people like to refer to as food deserts, but they're out in the middle of the county. Solomon is one of them. Right. One of them's out Spring Creek, where there's just no grocery stores. Right. In Solomon, there's one community that they have a church. They've tried to work with churches in all these places to say, you be the point, we'll bring you the food, you get to the people. And one of them has 22 widows that do not drive.
Good grief.
In Sodom. Now think about that. They're 30 minutes from a grocery store and they don't drive. Now a lot of them have family around. I'm not saying that, but still, if you're out there and you're alone, so they help those families get potatoes. But it's that kind of story all over the county of different families, and they help with the beacon. They partner with already existing neighbors in need. They take them, so they take the food to them in different places and help them distribute it out into the county, all over the county. And this is a ridiculously large county that we serve. That's one of the issues in Madison County that poverty hits so hard, is it's not just that you may not have as much money, but you can't get to the resources that you need to for assistance or just to buy groceries.
Do you get lots of calls in your office from needy folks? How do you handle it?
We had 2 this morning that came through.
How do you handle that?
We just hired a new administrative assistant, and the one thing in interviewing now that I have to tell them is be ready.
Yes.
Because that's a hard thing. We're talking about being that church because we're different, but we're also size-wise one of the only churches that has doors open every day.
Yeah.
And now the interstate being through also changed that. People transitioning through here run out of gas, need help. Yeah. So they show up. those are the easy ones, you know, if it's just need gas and you can get on your way, we can help you with that, get you a meal and get down the road. The hard ones are the ones that show up with a mother with two little ones in tow, and, you know, their lights are being turned off and they're, you know, don't have food. What do? You have to do something. So that's tough, and it's tough on the person that's a frontline person. She's sitting at the desk and suddenly they're coming in, and I tell her, I've come in frequently to them crying and, you know, their first time because they just aren't ready for handling it. And it is tough, it's tough. But we have a pastor's fund, and I'm amazed how many people support the pastor's fund that have nothing to do with Marshall Baptist Church, that give money to that. And so we can help. We also are in connection with the Beacon, Neighbors in Need. We all work together. We're the Mars Hill front face of that. And we're trying to develop that even more. The Beacon has a site, you may have seen it, that they're getting ready, hopefully, to build on.
No, it's Marshall though, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. But it will be able to house everything for the county, we're hoping, in one central location, so that we can help people get better coverage. The deal in Madison is just resources. How do you get the resources? Catholic Church works well with us. They don't have as many, but they're willing to help. And so we all try to, this family needs help. Do we have the funds to help them? Okay. If we don't, where can we help you connect together? And even our former assistant put in a thing called, it's a network that's on the computer that we can connect with the other key agencies. So if you come to our place and fill out a form, even if we can't give you all the help we need, you can go there and they've already got you in the computer. It's a network. They can just pull you up and say, oh, I see Marshall Baptist gave you this. We're going to help you with.
You are really, you meaning the church, the Marshall Baptist Church, really are a social agency in a sense.
Big time.
Big time.
More than anything else. That building that used to have Sunday school for students now is full of food and bicycles that we give away, which we've given 400 away in the last 5 years of rehab bicycles. But it's become, those rooms now are resourcing predominantly food, but other needs for people.
Is there a meal site in there still?
And the meal site is going, we lead that in the county as well. We're the leading Meals on Wheels place.
And how many people are served each day?
About a dozen come. But then about 30 go out beyond that. And some of them even some of the ones that come will help deliver their neighbor.
What is the criterion for somebody coming in for lunch?
Over 60.
That's not going to be so.
There's not now, and they have a fee. You can pay your $2 if you want to. If you can't pay it, they still feed you. The county, that's one of the best things our county has probably done. We have 8 of those in the county. Ours is, like I said, the most active. Marshall's close. And does a lot as well, but they said they don't have the church to help them like they do here. They tease us about it, but it's a good touch point for our seniors in a number of ways that we can find out. We've sent out crew. We got a crew going out probably next week to help a man that they deliver to who's having trouble with the flooring in his trailer, and we're going to fix that. Just to check these folks, you know, and it's a ministry of a lot of our people plus other church people in the area that come to deliver these every day. So these seniors, 4 days a week, are getting somebody coming in their house, laying eyes on them, saying, you know, what's wrong with your arm? You know, there's that spot. We're able to do a lot of checking that wouldn't happen otherwise.
I think so often people don't see that part of what the church does. They see the lovely building and the morning service, and they know all about that, but don't realize these things, which often are not seen because they're not here all.
Right.
They're all over everywhere. There's one thing you have done, which I found interesting. And I was surprised when you call it the Baptist bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah. Talk about that for a second, because that was a fairly new concept of Baptists.
Oh yeah, there was. Well, and it wasn't just Baptist. No one. That was my doctoral project.
Oh, is that what you did your doctoral thesis?
That was my thesis, and my whole research was on that because. I thought I would just copy, you know, see what else somebody was doing, and no one was doing it. Episcopals had a little bit going on. Yeah, they do. They had a little bit of a piece. Most places still do it too young, I think, for students. The idea was to have a rite of passage ritual.
That's what the Jewish people came from. The Jewish tradition.
They came from that tradition, and they still had the best thing going on. But they did it at 13. was a movement in this country about 100 years ago to move it to 16.
Yeah.
But it failed. They just couldn't get over the
Change the age.
I tell them, my friends are Jewish, I say, well, it's because Jesus was baptized when he was 13. They
That's
say,
right.
you're very funny.
Yeah.
But anyway, they do, the idea is you become a son or daughter of the law. No longer are your parents in charge of you. You're passing that on to them themselves. They're in charge of their own spiritual self before God. That's the whole idea of the bar mitzvah. And that's what we're trying to do, is say, I try to talk to them about, here's what have you had invested in you to this point. And so we talk about their birth story and their baptism and their dedication here at the church and what all they've been involved with. And then we say, now you're leaving us in general, going to college. 9 out of 10 leave us to go away. So what do you take with you from that? And try to talk directly about that, because I didn't have that when I grew up. They handed me a Bible and said, good to have you.
Yeah, I remember
See
that
you
one
later.
too.
And, but we didn't really have a chance for them to talk. And what I discovered is that senior year in high school, and now that's changing with early colleges and all this, but still, at that age, when, their parents are done with them. They're usually driving their parents crazy. That's natural. And then the school's done with them. When you're a senior, they're ready to work with these next group coming on.
Yeah.
We know where you're going to college. Bye. You're just annoying us. And so suddenly they're panicked, we've discovered. They're ready to say, I'm getting ready. I think it's the biggest transition of our lives. And I've had people argue with me, but I said, marriage doesn't do that. Nothing else has as big a transition of leaving the culture you've known for 18 years, being thrown into a new culture, as that transition is. So the kids are usually ready to talk about it, to think about it. And I bring some good people in, the Pauline Cheeks of the world, come in and we listen to them tell their stories, and then try to help them say, what of that enables you to go forward and into this, what do you take with you? Is it all going to be left, or are you going to, is some of that going to empower you to go on? What are you going to do?
Nobody's dealt with this kind of thing with most young people. Parents are too busy thinking about the future.
Oh yeah, they can't.
And teachers at schools don't have time.
Oh, they have an academic piece they have to work on. So it's been amazing, the stories they get told, how they've done it, and how it empowers them to go on, and how it empowers them to talk to their parents. And part of it is just hearing their own stories. They haven't heard them from their parents. As you said, they're so busy with everything else. Well, the parents forget to give them that power.
And you're leading these classes primarily with Pauline other people?
Yes, we do it every spring for the kids.
How many youth are in those classes? What, 5, 6?
Usually just 5 or 6, And you don't want a big group because they can't tell all their stories.
Can you tell what effect that's had on the young people?
Definitely. I can tell the kids that when I, being back in other churches, kids would have crisis when they got to college. It was interesting. And often spiritual crisis, and more progressive, however you want to describe churches, aren't as, the one thing we're not as good is teaching them why we do some of the things we do. We're not always the best, I learned all that from my home church, but we're not as good at that. We get into social issues and other things, and we forget what's the basis of what I need to know. Why does it matter that I do communion? What is that about? Why does it matter that I was baptized? What difference did that make? And I had kids that were going to college and meeting with these conservative students or Muslim students or even Jewish students, and they would ask them questions about those things and they couldn't answer them. Even my top kids that, were active in presidents of youth groups and stuff, they couldn't say. One of them called me when they said, "What? Tell me about this communion thing. What exactly is the Lord's Supper?" And they'd taken it all, you've been involved with it all there, but still couldn't articulate that. And the problem we do, we teach that, but often we teach it when they're 9 years old. That doesn't always get translated when you're 15 you can't make sense of Lord's Supper at 9. You just don't have the developmental brain ability to understand somebody's body being broken. That it doesn't make sense. Blood being, you're still a concrete thinker. You can't make sense of that. At 17, 18, I can make, I'm starting to conceptualize, I can make sense of that. So part of it is just talking to them about what we believe in context, about being the person of faith, and taking it, or you can take it with you or not, their decision. But at least to know that.
How many classes and sessions do you have?
We have 4, and then we have a retreat, sort of a mini retreat.
So everybody gets to, are these young people free in talking about these things with their peers? Is it something that is?
Oh yeah, they have a great time. It's fun. We talk about naming, and we start with things that they all have in common. That are, when they talk about their birth stories, there's some hilarious and wonderful things they find out. They don't know. Who you named after, and why does that matter, and how are you connected? And then we talk about their biblical, so why does that matter when they start talking about baptism and those things. And a lot of them have just gone through without even having any connection with that. So it's great to be on the other side, hear those stories.
Yeah.
Those are a blessing. But to have them have that power then, that story matters to them. It's not just something I have, but why does it matter that I have it? What good is it to me? Well, that's what we were missing, I think.
Are you, with your example, are you giving other churches an assist in doing something comparable?
Oh yeah, we have it. I made it available immediately, and actually redid it into a booklet form.
Oh, good.
That you can download, so that churches. I told them I've been a youth minister long enough. I even have the published notebook, so they can just print it and put their name on it. They don't have to. I said I don't want anything from it except to know you're doing it. I have a lot, and the interesting thing, lots of Baptist churches, but I have a lot of Methodists and others who have snagged it to use it for theirs. And I always tell them, do something creative if you change something, but let me know. Might be something we put in to change it. It's still pretty close to the basic that it was, and probably simpler would be the only thing I would say. I've really toned it down to. The first one I think was a few weeks longer. If you can get somebody for 4 weeks,
that's good,
and can connect for the hour and a half, those 4 times, you can make some progress on figuring out, where they are and what. And a lot of it's just getting them to talk to their parents and to think about their own process.
It's last time I checked, there were about 6 or maybe 7 full-time ministers in the French Broad Baptist Association. Do you know what the figure is now?
It's probably not that many. If you took the retired guys out,
okay,
who call themselves full-time often, but they're just retired. There's not, but I know of about 3 or 4 churches that can
afford that
for a full-time.
Right, and that becomes a huge issue. For example, you become by default, as a major big church, you become a leader by virtue of your by your stature as a full-time minister. And of course, I'm sure Sue Fitzgerald used to talk about in her travels around the county, going to all the small churches. She was, of course, looking at things like supplies and things that they need to help with their ministry. I'm sure you become a resource person for everybody in the county.
It's interesting because of theological issues. Some already count us out. They just say we're not.
Yes. Okay.
Now that's not tons, but then there are set that still connect and talk to, and some of them from very conservative churches. I tried to recommend one actually to my home church recently as a pastor because they were looking and I knew his abilities and said, you'd be great. He declined and didn't do it, but he at least considered it. He did consider it. Was honored that I called. But we have I get called on for tough issues.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And that's when they call on me, when they've had to deal with, all right, one of my deacon's son has come out of the closet. How do we talk about that?
So you're the one who gets it.
And so they'll call me and say, can we have lunch and talk about that? And then we had one recently, God forbid, I told him when I called, I said, he had a son who committed suicide. And I said, I have no idea how you feel, and I really don't want to know. And he said, that's interesting. I said, I really don't. I said, I can't imagine losing a child. And he understood, he agreed. But so often it's that kind of pastoral care because I'm not the oldest, but I am the seniorist guy. I had recently for the Western North Carolina group we're part of, which is a lot of our churches that are in other counties. We have a group. And I was calling and somebody said, why they told me to call you because you're the old guy in the group. And I said, well, physically I'm not that old, but they said, but I'd been there longer than any of the other pastors that were in the group, and I hadn't thought of it, but I really had.
I look back, Tommy, I said, well, I'll give you your name, Justus, J-U-S-T, I see he could be hugely important in your name. I look back these are things that you talked about in the church. In 2001, you talked about the death penalty, abortion, homosexuality. 2003, the state lottery, school vouchers, war. 2004, under God in the Pledge of Allegiance. Again, homosexuality and the church, a little bit more complicated. Assisted suicide, cancer, Israel and Palestine. That's just a few. You have been a social arbiter from the very beginning. I remember vividly when the county commissioners decided they were going to, in fact they printed it, it was in the newspaper, that statement about homosexuality, for example. I looked up on my TV at 6:30, and there was Tommy Justus talking about this issue. Talk to me a little bit about the social justice part of who you are.
Well, I tell people, I think it's more of a biblical thing than it is for me as social justice. People, I think that term in its own has become a divisive term, and it shouldn't be. I think that justice, I'll stick with.
Yes.
I think that's important, and I think you can't read the Bible without it saying, you can't read any of the Psalms, you can't read anywhere without saying, if you're not working for justice for those who are most vulnerable in the society, then I can't see anywhere else where church has a mission. I mean, our mission is to be with those who are the most vulnerable, wherever they are. Widows and orphans often was the Bible term for it, but it was the people that struggle the most. And where are they, and where's the church standing in that piece? And it's not people have made it into a divisive piece often, which that's what really is my struggle, that I don't see it as divisive. I see it as opportunity for the church and for us to share resources that we've been blessed with. That's what our goal is, I think, as a church. And so when we start drawing lines, again, that's what got us into that usually to start with. That's usually where the problem initiated. So if you are going to draw lines about that, I'm to a point now where I don't even like to, I said, if you're going to draw lines, let's just not talk about it. But if you're going to say, how can we make it better for folks? How can we use what we have? Then let's go forward and do it. And because I found, I hang out with a lot of friends that are more conservative than me, lots more conservative theologically, have a lot of pastor friends that have. But when we can talk about these things, they disagree. I like when they can biblically disagree. Most of the time they usually can. I've discovered. No, they can't they can't find, they have to work hard, which I love it for them to do. Let's talk about biblical, let's talk about those concepts that are divisive and say, why are they? But I'm really not into just labeling and saying you're here and we're not. And I think that's where the church got in trouble. I think when we start saying, okay, you're in because you look like me, and then you don't. Well, pick the next subject and we don't look like each other. So, don't do that. When it comes to justice, let's have it for everybody on whatever level, whether it's gender, whether it's what you just named. We'll make it.
I remember on campus some years ago. This was a big deal for students on campus. The gay students asked the student union if they could have a room,
Place.
And they said no. And the president sided with the decision of student council. And the next thing I know, Tommy Justus has said, you can meet in the church if you need a room. How do you, that's the case why I said a while ago, you can't separate the local church from the institution.
Oh, sure.
Practically everybody on campus at a certain point went to church and so across the street,
Sure.
and that's still true in great measure. How have you handled? Have you gotten kickback when you've been openly?
Sure, but not much. I say to people, what is the Jesus answer when you say these are people that are being excluded in one place? Do we shut the door on them, or do we have an opportunity for them to come? We don't have to believe. We don't. I said you don't even have to agree with what they're saying, right. But we do have to give them a place to talk about, a safe place. And nobody kicked on that. They said, what do you do? Well, you give them a place. I think in general it was helping the church become When I came here, I love to tell about the cabinets in the kitchen had locks on them.
Oh, yeah.
Drove me crazy. You couldn't go get a salt shaker without getting a key. And I said, what are y'all doing? They said, well, we got to keep this stuff because people come in. I said, well, if they need it, let them come get it. I can't believe people would need salt shakers that badly that you have to keep them locked up. And they said, well, they'll just walk out. Well, we've had it open. I'm not like my office in 23 years. I said, and the church in general. I'd rather it not be locked. At night we lock it, but I said, open this up and let people come in. What we had become was a museum, I think, instead of a church. And when you become a museum, people come in and look at it, but they can't touch it or see it, or And I said, I don't think that's it. So when we developed a new sign out front about 5 years ago, they were having the church meeting. They were going to put the sign and have what they wanted to put on it. And Glenn Tucker got it. He stood up in the meeting and said, well, I don't think we ought to put Marshall Baptist Church out there. Everybody was like, what? He said, I think we ought to put Marshall Community Center where Marshall Baptist Church meets out there. And I said, well, that's great. I like that way. Nobody voted for it didn't happen. But it really was the idea that that's a gift to us from people from hundreds of years. And how do we use it?
It's the wording is a little different from that, but it's very much like that even today.
Oh, yeah.
If you look at that sign, we go by, your name's not even on that sign, is it?
Well, it doesn't need to be.
No, it doesn't need to be. But except that every church you pass and you see the sign out front, it says minister.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I'm
And they have it, a lot of them have it where they can change it real easily. See, that way you don't have the rest of that.
Slide.
But I really do think that there's an idea of it, if it's more of a community place, people have come to that church. We've had more members come in through other doors besides the front door of the sanctuary.
Right.
They come in because their child has been in the children's choir. They've come to a meeting of something else. They've been fed at the mill site. Something has happened that they've come and they said, I want to try out worship here and see if it fits. And they've taken it. Rarely, this day and age particularly, the old days of I tell people it's the Baptist church I was trained to pastor, and it never exists anymore, but you came and you moved to a new community, you just joined that Baptist church, but now, very few of them are Baptists, first of all, that come, and most of them don't come through that front door, they come through something else that connects them, and if the doors aren't open for other avenues, then how are you going to ever connect them?
The one thing I've always been aware of here in your job, and all the ministers who've preceded you have dealt with this, there are three constituencies here. Well, there used to be, but maybe that's not true anymore. You have the town folks, you have the college professors and the staff, those kinds of folks, and then you have college students. So there are probably fewer of the college students at this point. But I remember thinking that any minister who takes on this job is covering a vast array of different things that people bring with them to a service. Is it intimidating to preach in front of a group of religion professors out here who've got doctorates and all sorts of things? Is that hard to do?
The ones here have been gracious, I'll have to say. The Pageleys of the world have been more helpful, and they have been critical. Jinx could get you,
yes,
but that was part of his plan.
That's Ellison Jinx.
He still loved me, but he wanted you to. He would always take the other point. It didn't matter which side.
He's wanted to argue.
He's wanted to argue. That was his point. So those folks have been gracious, but no, I have not. As I said before, I think there's a very clear difference what they come there for than what they come here for.
Yes.
And the educational piece is different, and it needs to be. And that's a worship piece we're doing, and it's going to be different. So we're not trying to. Now, I've been to churches that try to do that, and sometimes you get a nice academic presentation, but it's not necessarily, moving me to change, to my spiritual growth. So, I'm always trying to be clear about what we were doing versus what they were doing. But the town gown piece, after being here not too long, we had a visioning committee a few years into
I remember
being
that.
here.
Indeed, Gerald was on that.
And then we had a second one about 10 years, 12 years later. And the 12 years later, it was shocking. We looked back, and the biggest thing they noticed was that they checked the 10 people that Henry Huffin identified individual to be on that committee. Mm-hmm. He was chair of deacons at the time, where none of them were related directly to the college. And it was pretty amazing. Now, the first one when I came here was 3 3/4 college people. You know, the Chapmans, I guess now. But then the next one did not have. And wasn't by design, nobody had thought of that early. That was a thing that came out later to say, if these people represent the church, they are not represent, you know, that it's not the college. Because there was a time in one of our things Pauline brought out in her history that says, as the college goes, so the church goes.
Mm-hmm. That's not true.
By far not true anymore, even though the presidents have all been members and, you know, have been active, but very different. You know, when Fred Bentley was here when I came, you know, I called him about,
oh yeah,
we want to do something with the parks, we want to do something here, you know. Fred's first call I'd make, and was fine, and he would talk to me about it, but you know, I would call Dave. Dave would laugh if I called him about that. He would say, "Wow, why did you call him Dave?" Even though he's a deacon. You know.
But you know, and we've noticed this too, that many of the faculty and administrators no longer live here. They've scattered away, and they don't have that sense of community that you were talking about.
That's why the coaches are the biggest group, because they are the ones that live here and have their crowd here, even on the weekends. The academics in general, I can't name more than 2 or 3 professors that live here in town. And, you know, Scott Pearson's active member, and, you know, Laura lives on Bailey Street, but there's just not many.
Yeah, that's very true.
So it's just, and I watched that happen, because when I came here, that big group retired in '95. You know, when there was 93, 94, 95, I think was the biggest group of retirement that we've had from Marsville. And when they replaced them, they couldn't afford to live here. Was one issue. There weren't very many homes available, and if they weren't priced so that a new professor coming in could afford them. So they moved to Weaverville. I mean, or to Asheville, they had to. The other thing that happened, you know, the interstate, they could get back and forth from those areas. So they would drive in. Why not do that? And so suddenly you had this where everybody, all the professors were here, to none of the professors were here. I mean, it went the same way in the religion department. I've been interested. I could, you know, when I first came here, I could call on 6 different people to preach for me from the religion department. And now, none of them really care to preach that are from the religion. I mean, they will. I've had 1 or 2 do it, and Guy will do it now. But there was a while there where if you were going to call somebody to preach from the religion department had very few. So, you know, that's 20 years of watching that and movement to that. And it's not, I don't think it's I don't say it's critical. I just have been an observer of how that's happened and how we responded and moved with that. And I think most of the time we've done fairly well.
So shortly after you came here, you made a decision to go back, well, to work on a doctorate. What triggered that?
One of the nice things about being in an educational place is they were supportive of it. It was more just personal growth. How do you do that? I was going to conferences, and every year you'd go to a conference and something, but there wasn't, you hit the surface of something, but you didn't really deal with much. So part of it was just my own having interest in some personal growth and an area that I felt wanted to just...
And you could do much of that online too at that point.
Started to. We were one of the first did it at Drew. We were their first online class. And so we had interesting, they were stealing technology from other universities who were already doing it. But yeah, there was some fun glitches those first few times trying to do an online class. We had no sound. You could do visual, but they couldn't keep up. We'd have to type whatever we were trying to say to each other, and had some fun things with that. But it worked out. We were able to do it. We developed a pretty good core doctoral folks around here that wanted to work on it together, which was fun. Barry Jones was here at the time in the religion department, and he helped coordinate our group. He actually, Drew used him as a supervisor, and he actually took that to Campbell when he went to work there at Community School to help them do their doctoral program. But because he connected with Drew and was able to mirror a lot of what they had already done.
Did you find the coursework comparable to, better than, or what, in the classes that you had compared to Southern?
Yes, Drew was pretty flexible at that time, the dean I'd become friends with, and he was really into the church had changed, and what we'd been trained in our MDiv was not what we needed to run. You know, there was some good stuff. You were learning the Bible, basically, but the general operations was not helpful. And he was really interested in how that happened. So that helped us to, you know, we would say, he would poll us regularly. What do you need classes? You know, what do we need to work on stuff? And who do you know that's expert in that? They weren't exclusive of having just their trained people to do it. If they had people, that was great. And so he would say, you know, we can do a class and bring this person in to talk to you and see if that's helpful. And so a lot of our classes we designed ourselves, you know, or at least gave the topic and the parameters, and then they would add the syllabus of what we needed to do to make it academically acceptable. But so we were able to do a lot of that, which was really both helpful and fun to do.
And you got that degree in 2001, was that right?
Yeah. Yes, I think that's right.
I remember when you were doing it. I remember talking to Polly Cheek one day, and she mentioned that she had. Did she read your dissertation?
Oh, she was my. You know, that I was her about 10th that she had done, and she was excited. It was computer, so she could write all over it. She, you know, she'd done it back on the old day typewriters and all that. And so mine was one of the first she had done on computers, so she loved that. She could mark, and so when Barry Jones was doing a final reading of mine, he called me and he said, Pauline has seen this, right? I said, what do you mean, Barry? He said, Pauline has seen this, right? And I said, why does that matter? He said, just answer my question. And I told him, I said, yeah. He said, I'm going to make some marks on it, but they may or may not be useful to you. So, because she'd taken it and just polished it to a point where it was very impressive. So he knew that she had already, he didn't have very long to realize there wasn't a lot of correction for him to do. She's one of those gifts that not many of us have paid attention to.
When she mentioned that she had done several, I thought, my goodness, who would know that? And how would you find somebody who would have that skill?
And I've recommended her at least 2 others since that have used her, and she loves, she gleans from everything she reads like that. Just amazes me. So she's one of those great.
I'm always amazed when I look around the congregation at how many incredibly talented, gifted people there are who are so quiet about what they do.
Oh, yes.
You don't know.
Part of, I tell people pastoring in a place like this, and really anywhere but here, is I tell them I'm much more like a broker than I am a pastor.
What does that mean?
I said, I'm the one who's, all right, this gifted person needs to be doing this, and all I'm doing is getting the conduit in between and getting out of the way. Because you have those kind of people that can do it. And if you can broker that, it can make your church look great, and you're just back in the back watching it happen. And that, I really think pastors miss that a lot in their congregations. Ours is obvious. The Pauline Cheeks of the world are a good example. But I think there are more in other places that they don't do that.
Probably so. And probably a lot of people don't necessarily want those kinds of things known because they just prefer to go to church.
They just want to do it,
They'd be quiet in church. We talked about the children briefly a while ago, and I know that Isaac is working in Seattle. Tell me about the girls.
They're both teachers. One's in Winston-Salem, the youngest, and the oldest is in Moncks Corner. Charleston area. Both are teachers and followed their mother, I guess, to be a teacher, and they're enjoying it. And both are in schools that are Title I, or however you would describe that. And both have found those are better schools to teach in.
And they enjoy their work.
They really like it. They are the minority in both their schools.
Really?
Oh yeah, by far. Both of them. At one time, one of them was the only white teacher, I think, in the school, and the other one was by far a minority. But both of them have learned the different, have appreciated that.
Their father, though, prepared them for this ages ago. Hopefully, of all things. You've been here.
Community did. The community helped that too.
Oh yeah, right. Okay, you've been here 23 years. What do you see happening in the next 10 years with regard to the church? Do you see there being any change at all between the church and the university in their relationship over the years?
I think the church will continue to be connected with the university, and we probably do it better or as well as any others I've seen around in similar small towns that have a university that connects. I get to work with students that are going into summer work in ministry and then probably on into ministry. And I also get to teach a class in January with prospective ministers. And when I get to be with those, I tell them two things. I tell them that the one thing you're going to have to be prepared for is probably not to be a full-time pastor. I think my job is going out.
Why?
I just don't think churches, I think churches have two looks. They either look mega big or they're like ours, and you're going to have a lot more chance to work somewhere else part-time. We could be a professor, it could be something else, and pastor a church. I just don't see the church having that model we talked about that was trained for going on. It's just, the society is just not aimed at that. It's just not going to support it, I don't think. Which I don't think it's necessarily terrible. I'm not saying it critically, I'm saying that I see it happening, and I don't think it's going to be bad. I think being connected, I drive a school bus most days of the school year as a sub, I referee soccer. I think those connections out in the community help keep you connected with what you don't see at the church every day. I can get in that ivory tower and then stay there just like you can in the academic world. And so I think by having to be out, and so I tell students that, I think the new world will be, I can't see when Sharon and I both either retire, that she would replace either of us full-time.
Really?
I really don't think so. I think maybe one with some, that would coordinate more of a part-time staff people that would use professionals, which has led me to another thing we're working on now, is to try to do seminary level education in the summers with teachers or others who would be interested in taking those kind of courses, because I think that education is important, and I think the people that are going to fill that are not going to be full-time ministers. And I see so many who are called to do that kind of work out in the school systems or social work or criminal justice, wherever they happen to be. So to give them an opportunity to continue and to become even at a professional level, those kind of opportunities, I think, are there. So when you say, well, the church will look like, I don't think it will look the same staffing to start with, which will change the way you do ministry. We've already changed a lot of that. We don't have church on Sunday night. We don't have church Wednesday night. And people are shocked at that. And then I get calls going, how did y'all do that? We're just not able to keep all these things going. And I tell them, I'd rather my people be out in the world doing something than just coming back here to have one more meeting or one more service. I'd rather than being doing what they need to be doing in the world.
Well, you had...
that's where I think.
It's interesting that you say, I don't think I would have even thought that. In your time here, you've dealt with, of course, the chaplains on campus, mostly Paul in the early days, Paul and Pinty. Were there interpersonal, that's the wrong word, were there things that you all did together for both the church and the school? Did those kinds of things happen in dealing with the chaplains on campus?
Yes. Well, Paula, obviously, she had a lot of things that happened just with folks in the church. Todd Bowling, I was on the group, they asked me to serve with the school to help find the replacement, and we called Todd, so I knew him from the beginning, and we had a good relationship. Stephanie and I have a great relationship, but what I find more is I end up with their tops, or some of their most dedicated leadership kind of core ends up at our place. If that makes sense. They end up, because of their interest in either leading something and coming to talk to us, or just in worship at, I hate to say it, as a more mature level, then they show up there. So that's how we've probably connected more than anything. They try to be broader than just Marshall Baptist, and try not to be exclusively directing them there. And the last couple of folks have not been members, chaplains, and which is, I think, helpful. People say, well, I can't believe the chaplain's not a member. I said, we got to broaden this out. We have so few that are, first of all, I mean, they're members of other Baptist churches. I said, I wouldn't have a problem if they're members, if we had some that were other denominations still. I said, I think we have to be able to be, in a world that we're in today, if we're that exclusive, we're not going to say much to a student who might be considering here. What I've discovered is that the millennials, I guess you define them now, that age student, is much more open and those kind of things. Even if they're very conservative theologically, they think we're hypocritical because of the lines we draw about anything else. So I said we need to be broader.
Do you get students to come by and asking you, sometimes a student will call you and say, can I come talk about an issue? Do you ever get students, or do they go to the chaplain?
Some, not overrun with it, but some, but more often I need to interview you for a class.
Oh.
And when they come to interview for a class is when they ask me the question that's on their heart.
Oh.
That's so that's when that happens. But it usually comes first as
Something else.
I need to talk to you, this class, I need to have an interview for this class. So that's the way it usually opens up, which is fine. It gives them a little less, it's not as intimidating to come that way.
You are in the prime of your career, and as your career progresses, at some point you'll see Act 3 coming along. What do you want to do in Act 3 if you want?
I don't know that, but when you age, it does start to, you think about that. You see friends do that, and you start saying, what? I don't see myself in a denominational position that a lot of people, end up going to work and, doing something where they're consulting or traveling or helping denomination. I'm just not seeing myself as a denominational person. I really enjoy mentoring young ministers, and I don't know how that in the future would look or how I could plug into that, but I like that a lot. So that's probably, who knows, maybe I can do some other piece as well, but I can't see it being far from ministry in some shape, form, or fashion. But I really haven't seen a vision of that yet. I think
maybe that's good. And what happened is, as the other things have happened
organically.
Yeah, when it's
I think it will, because I never expected either of the others to come along as they have. Bob Edwards, when I came here, voted against me buying the parsonage.
Why?
He said, he came to me, he wanted me to know because, he's a good friend, neighbor. I said, you just didn't want to live near me. He said, well, really, I want to live near your family, not you. He was, his typical humor. But he said, I really don't expect you'll stay long, and a new person will need a place to live. Right? He wasn't, and he was very clear about that.
Yeah.
So after, he'd gone to the nursing home, and I'd been here 12, 13 years by then. I said, Bob, I guess I stayed longer than you thought. And he said, you had opportunities, why didn't you go? And I said, well, this is a good place. And he said, it is. It is a good place.
It is a good place.
And there was a stability there, I told him, about raising children in one place. I said, there's something that happens with children when that can be stable, other things in their life can go crazy and they can handle it when they can't otherwise.
So you left your heart in Mars Hill and are still here going strong.
I don't know where I'll go from.
And let's hope it stays for a long time.
I hope so.
Thank you so much.
Oh, it's been great. It was fun.
Thank you.
It was fun. It was fun.
Great.